There was no real let-up from the storm that was embracing our lives as a family. It had never been any different, with one calamity after another, or at least that's how it felt. We never knew what was coming next, other than that it would be another difficult challenge. But when my daughter Kez was diagnosed with cancer in her windpipe, it stumped me, because I had spent the previous 15 years or so fearing for my son's life, not because he was unwell, but because he was vulnerable and constantly putting himself in danger. It never occurred to me that Kez might lose her life, so my initial reaction was unbelief mixed with dread. The cancer was rare, with a high recurrence rate, and the prognosis was poor. Little was known about it at the time. Without any kind of treatment, Kez's life expectancy was estimated to be less than 12 months. Because of the high recurrence rate, an operation would be considered as palliative care only, unless, of course, in the unlikely event that the cancer didn't recur, it would become curative. There were 3 options open to her, and none of them were good. The proposed treatment was removal of the thyroid gland, a permanent tracheostomy with removal of the laryngeal nerves, which would leave her without a voice, and esophageal resection, with the stomach being moved above the lungs to fill the gap left from the removal of all the tissues in the neck. The second option was death. Third, experimental surgery. Weeping almost silent tears, Kez told me that she didn't want to die, but knew that in order to live, she had no option but to endure life-threatening surgery, where she would wake up with her natural voice removed from her forever, a hole in the base of her neck to breathe through, eating difficulties from the esophageal resection, and no guarantees at all that the cancer could successfully be removed or wouldn't return. She knew she couldn't live with that outcome, but neither did she want to die. Although I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, I personally hoped that she would find peace in allowing death to take her, without any mutilation to her young body. But she had just turned 19, had hopes and dreams for her future, and wanted so much to live. Nothing in my life had prepared me for what we were going to go through, and the emotional pain was different to anything I had experienced before. My worst fear was starting to be realised, and I was terrified because I had no choice but to confront it. But it wasn't me who had the cancer diagnosis. Kez needed to get through this trial and would need every available resource I could tap into in order to support her. I refused to believe that she would die, knowing that as soon as I acknowledged that possibility, I would lose the ability to help her to keep fighting for her life. It was a hopeless situation, but to simply give in and give up left no room for making the best of such dire circumstances. If her days on this earth were going to be shortened, then we needed to make sure they weren't wasted on grieving for a future that wouldn't belong to her. Driving home, alone, from a family birthday celebration, I began crying out to God, not in anger, but in desperation and fear. With tears streaming down my face and despair in my heart, I told him I was so afraid for Kez and didn't know what to do. None of us were ready to make the kind of decisions we were being required to make, but time was running out. Kez was sick and was going to die anyway, but a choice about how that was going to happen still had to be made. In a more lucid moment during that journey home, I was reminded of the biblical Abraham and Isaac, and how Abraham had to trust God enough to lay his son Isaac on the altar without knowing for certain whether he was going to be a sacrifice or not. But Abraham also knew that God hates the shedding of innocent blood, and acted in obedience to what God had asked of him. It was then that I knew beyond doubt that if I was to know peace, I had to lay Kez on that altar, entrust her life to God, and be prepared for any outcome. The following morning, a dear friend emailed to say she had been praying for Kez in the early hours, and Abraham and Isaac had come to mind. Now I knew for sure that God was going to take us through this horrible situation, and that he was going to be glorified through it. This first video is an introduction to how we discovered Kez had something wrong, and how it was starting to look like cancer. December 2009, and my daughter Kez, who is 18, has been complaining of breathing difficulties, particularly at night, since earlier in the year. She's seen a number of different doctors who have diagnosed asthma and have therefore been treating her symptoms with asthma medications. The treatment isn't working, and Kez is frustrated because her breathing hasn't improved. She feels there's little point in returning to the doctor and is starting to believe she's imagining she's unwell. I tell her she must persist, that there's something wrong, but she's 18 and knows her own mind. I can't force her to do anything. But eventually she agrees she must speak to the doctor again, and this time she sees someone different. He reads her history and is concerned. It's clear he's dismissing asthma. I can see in his eyes and the way that he glances at me that he's worried for Kez. He orders a chest x-ray and we await the results. Kez now finds another symptom has appeared, acid reflux, and another problem has developed. She has started to complain that sometimes food gets stuck before moving down her gullet. I look on the internet and try to match the symptoms of shortness of breath with acid reflux. It interests me when I learn that doctors most often look at gastroesophageal reflux disease as the cause of asthma, when asthma begins in adulthood, with symptoms getting worse after a meal, exercise, at night, or after lying down, and asthma treatments don't work. I explained to her that acid could be leaking into her lungs, which would make them hurt. The acid would make the airways sore and constricted, and make breathing difficult. Her lungs could become overinflated, as the recent chest x-ray has shown. There's also a strong possibility that the asthma inhalers have allowed the lower end of the esophagus to relax, causing stomach acid to regurgitate. The doctor suggests that Kez should take a break from work for at least a month to see if her symptoms improve. There's now a question mark over whether the chemicals being handled in her job as an apprentice hairdresser could be causing the problems. It's now early January 2010, and we're at the hospital seeing a respiratory physician. Kez looks pale and tired much of the time these days. She hasn't worked for 6 weeks, and there's been no improvement with her breathing. Her philosophy is that all things happen for a reason, and this is just one more thing to get through in life. She's just had a spirometry test to measure the amount and speed of air that can be inhaled and exhaled. The results have shown that inspiration is normal, but exhalation is not. The respiratory doctor suspects there's an obstruction in the upper airway. I'm not surprised to hear this. I've heard Kez breathing at night, and this thought has already occurred to me. I think back to a year ago when a viral infection left her with a strange sounding cough that lasted several months. I now realise this is when her breathing changed. There is reticence to perform a CT scan because Kez is only 18 and it could increase her risk of developing cancer. Blood is taken to be tested for asthma allergy and an ECG proves normal. A referral is made to an ENT specialist. Lansoprazole has been prescribed to treat the acid reflux. This appears to be helping. There's been some speculation that Kez could have a hiatus hernia, and although this would be unusual in someone of her age, size and build, the cough she had last year may have weakened the esophagus. Her breathing has improved and the pain in her back and lungs has gone. She looks much healthier and her energy levels have soared. She decides to return to work, and because her breathing is still not right, I drive her there and back to help conserve her energy. Work is a distraction for her. The end of January has arrived, and Kez has started to look pale and tired again. She's got a urine infection and is peeing pure blood. She laughs as she jokes that she's falling apart and feels like an old woman. We hear from the hospital that a CT scan has been booked for the 6th of February. We've heard nothing from the ENT department. We're told on the day of the CT scan that the history and spirometry test results suggest there is some narrowing of the windpipe and that the CT scan should provide further information. It makes sense to me that Kez will need an operation at some point, and I decide in my head that provided the problem can be fixed, we will cope with whatever comes next. Everyone is pleased that all blood results are normal so far. 2 weeks have passed and a letter arrives from the hospital. The CT scan has revealed what we assume is a nodule on the thyroid gland. Kez has an appointment a few days later for a fine needle aspiration with ultrasound. The telephone rings and the caller is a doctor from the hospital who wants to talk to Kez. He explains the procedure to her and then she asks him to clarify the results of the CT scan. He replies it's something unusual which has not been seen before and reassures her that he doubts it's anything to worry about. I find I'm continually reminding myself that Kez still looks well, despite the pallor and tiredness, that her glands are down, she has no appetite loss, she isn't losing weight, her blood work is all good, and that she is still able and willing to get on with her life. I'm reminding myself of all these things because I don't want to think too closely about what is really going on here. If I examine my thoughts in any depth, I know I will discover that I already suspect my precious, beautiful daughter has cancer.